Welcome everybody to probably a really quick little retro gaming hippie video from a few finds so far this weekend and thrift store garage sales. A lot of garage sales out there on my run today. I think tomorrow I'm going to head to the south end of this island here and do some swimming at some lakes down there because it's nice and warm. We have no swimming pool here and I need to get out in the water. And a little bit of biking down there, and then maybe we'll see what kind of garage sales might be on the south end. But up here today was a little more on the handheld side, which is not a really big thing for me on the handhelds, but I found the Game Boy Advance, Game Boy SP. The Advance has no battery pack, but it does work really fine. And the only reason why I decided to buy that bundle, besides the fact that it was really cheap, but it had this group of handheld games that are in my area of collecting some Star Wars games. Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, Super Return of the Jedi, nice and clean. It had a nice little bundle, as you can see here, of Game Boy and Game Boy Colors, a little Metroid Zero Mission, Game Shark, some Dragon Ball Z, chicken shooter, which literally you shoot chickens out of the air. Think of it as like Duck Hunt without the gun, I guess. Your finger just to control a Bionicle. Somewhat interesting game to me as far as Double Dragon Advance. That obviously is the Double Dragon game, so it was made by Atlas, who makes the Tactic Ogres games and some other really cool games. But I want to say Konami made Double Dragon originally. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, listeners, but some point in time they switched over to Atlas, who's a really cool maker of games. But as far as gaming goes, pretty slim, other than of course the handhelds. You know, I'm pretty happy about the Star Wars games. Although I wasn't going to go the Star Wars route for my collection on handhelds, I picked up all those, which, you know, it almost completes my handheld Star Wars collection, I suppose. I think maybe Yoda Stories might be the only one that's really out there. But found some really cool toys, though. I'm going to do a little comparison for you guys in the toy area. These guys are Remco AWA, which was a wrestling organization back when there was the big three, WWF, AWA, and NWA, which became WCW, and then everything got bought out by WWF sometime later. But these guys came out from Remco, mid 80s, early 80s. Pretty well posable, and they moved. They weren't the solid rubber like I'm about to show you from the WWF guys that I showed before. A little more action to them. So the Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk. This guy, if you don't know who he is, Rick Martel, who at the time in AWA was a big-time champion for them, Canada, and then AWA, and then when he came to the WWF, he made Strike Force, which won the titles tag team with Tito Santana when Can-Am Connection, Tom Zink just disappeared. Then he went on his own and became the model, Rick Martel. That's Rick Martel. And a classic bad guy from that era and stuff, the Baron von Raschig. And this guy, I think he's either the Freebirds, might be Michael P.S. Hayes, or he might be a Long Rider, which was, I think, Scott and Bill Irwin. I'd have to do a little more research on him, because I'm not 100% sure. But he's from the same Remco line in the AWA. And then there were a couple more figures that actually I picked up off of OfferUp, which is, if you guys know what that is, like a Craigslist type of site from somewhere. I think this was Arizona. Just because he's super cool, this is the Punisher. I think, if I looked at his butt, I could tell you. But I guess mid-80s Toy Biz, I think, who did the Marvel line back then. Haven't tried him yet. It's kind of cool he has his gun. But what he had was a cap firing action back here. I think you put a cap in there and then pow! If you could still find the little red caps that would fit back there for him. And then another wrestling line I actually wasn't familiar with. I just knew who he was, but I wasn't familiar with the wrestling line. But this is Arn Anderson from NWA time frame, part of the Four Horsemen. Then he went to the WWF, but he's definitely a staple in the wrestling industry back then. And I can't remember who made him. You know, I'm gonna look at his ass. Can't see his ass very well from there. It's too blurry. Let me look. Galoob. So Galoob made this guy in 1990, it says. So Galoob obviously got into the wrestling figure market in 1990-ish and then produced some figures. Much like the WWF line by LGN, he doesn't pose, he doesn't move. He's not hard rubber like them, but he's got no movement to him. But that's Arn Anderson, AA Anderson. So if we're going to look really quick at the three different, I suppose, major wrestling toy lines from that era, we'll put them side by side, and actually I'll put Mean Gene, because Mean Gene's super ass cool. Obviously, the WWF line was much bigger than the other three lines. They didn't pose. They were that hard rubber that didn't pose. Arn Anderson doesn't pose, but he's much smaller. And possibly Michael P.S. Hayes does move his arms and his legs. So he has got a little more posability to him than the other lines did. But scale-wise, Mean Gene is definitely, he's the announcer, and he's definitely he's dwarfing him. Look at him. We'll put him next to Animal from Road Warriors, and he's like, I dwarf you, Animal. Fuck you. No. Oh, sorry for the language, kids. But he definitely gets dwarfed by Mean Gene. The only thing about the WWF line, you know, I really like them. They're super cool. We're going to pull out a couple of the bigger guys since we're talking about them. And I'm just going to compare. Tough to compare him in this sense. What I was going to do was a scale comparison. So, you know, King Kong Bundy, if you knew him, he wasn't really tall necessarily, but he's a big dude. Andre the Giant, 8th wonder of the world, so he was over 7 feet tall. Big old Andre. But let's see how he compares to, boy, it's tough with the WWF because they were all big people. But we'll try to put him next to Hogan. So if you look at them side by side, they're probably about the same height. And the reality was Andre was over 7 feet tall, like 7'4", 7'5", depends on what they said. Hogan was not small; he was like 6'8". But when you put them side by side, they're about the same height. That's why I say with my figures for WWF, it's really hard to find a good scale to say, did they scale them down by the size of the wrestlers when they made the figures? I don't think they really did, but like I say, it's tough with WWF because at the time they were all big. It was about being big and strong and just big in general, as opposed to small and dynamic the way that a lot of it went before. But it was definitely the mid 80s era of I'm not gonna say they were doing steroids, but bigger was better. There was one other action figure I picked up today, which is probably my favorite one. He's definitely in super cool condition, but it's Mork from Ork, which was played by Robin Williams. If you never saw the show, unfortunately he's not with us anymore, but he was in super duper cool shape, his figure and everything. And Mork from Ork was a TV show before he really hit it big, and I think it kind of helped scale him there. He was an alien from the planet Ork. His name was Mork, and he crash landed on Earth, and it was pretty interesting. I never had this one as a kid, but for some reason he came to Earth in this egg, and it really looked Mego-ish. I'd have to go back and look, but my parents got me the littler figure with him in the egg when I was a kid. I'm not sure why, of Mork from Ork. And this guy, though, he's in really super good shape. You can see all the labeling on the side of his little transistor box. His face is in really good shape, his arms, his uniform. And then, moment of truth. Gotta have to set the camera down. Mork from Ork, Nano. Did you hear that? That was him. So although Rob Williams isn't here, he's still talking to me. So that even still actually worked. So that was kind of a super cool thing for me to find back then. And the last thing I found, which was at the thrift store, which is a throwback to me as a kid that grew up in Oregon, a little south. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, but it was a couple of albums I'm going to give to my niece who likes to collect LPs of these guys. And if you don't know who Wham is, On the right is George Michael, who obviously has passed away, and Andrew Ridgeley. And George Michael was the first concert I ever saw in the mid 80s in Tacoma, Washington, during his Faith tour. I think it was mid to late 80s. I got to see George Michael because as kids, when we were growing up, we'd have parties all the time at friends' house, and we did something called lip syncing. If you don't know what that is, that was where they played the music, played the song, and you got up there and the fake microphone went on and pretend like you were singing. And we sang the hell out of some Wham. And Fantastic was actually one of the big albums we sang a lot of. And then, of course, their big, huge debut album was Make It Big, which really put Wham on the map and put George Michael on the map. So I went ahead and picked the record albums up to give to my niece and just tell her to hold on to that eventually, you know, maybe I'll jam out to a little bit of 80s rap. So anyway, so that was my pickups the last few weeks here, running around the island and seeing things. So really strange bunch of things to find, in my opinion. You know, games, handhelds, yeah, you know, that's pretty common. But these Remco wrestling figures are just not something you see a lot of, because AWA was not really big in comparison to WWF and NWA, and certainly not big in the Northwest, which is where I'm at, where I grew up. It was definitely bigger in the South, like Georgia and those regions. So how those figures ended up here, it actually was a lady who said she bought storage units, and so could have been somebody in the service that came up here, whatever. And the Mork from Work, who's definitely a super cool toy. So we'll see what we find tomorrow. Head on the south end, get a little swim in, hit the lakes, get a little bike in, and see if there's any Sunday garage sales happening out on the south end. So hope you enjoyed this video. It's probably going to be the last of 3 that I'm going to upload back to back to back to back to kind of catch up on where I've gotten behind because of connection issues of living out in the middle of the woods and whatnot. So leave me some comments, questions. I'm always happy to hear about what people think about the things I find and what I have to say about them. So good luck out there on your hunts. Enjoy your gaming, and definitely enjoy your toy play.